So good evening and welcome to the Neighborhood Passions Affinity Network, presented by Google and Neighbor to Neighbor. My name is Jim Hawk and I'll be the host this evening. Tonight, we're focusing on one of our 8 key neighborhood passions, neighborhood planning and development. Our topic is Cane Ridge's Community Resource Declaration. In July 2018, the members of the Cane Ridge Community Club adopted a Community Resource Declaration for their community. The document acknowledges 5 key resources found within their boundaries and demands attention to these resources by developers. During this session, we're going to discuss how this document came into existence, the 5 key resources that the document talks about, and the demands made on developers. We'll also be talking about the impact this document has had on the community and on development there. Now, we're very pleased tonight to welcome Twana Chick as our guest. Twana is president of the Cane Ridge Community Club, a longtime neighborhood activist, and I could go on and on and on. But we are just so glad to have her here tonight. And she's looking good. We're glad that she's here. And Twana, if you don't mind, I'd like to start out with just the basics, because some of the people watching this are going to say, Cane what? Cane Ridge where? Can you give us can you tell us a little bit about Cane Ridge?
Yes, the Cane Ridge community has existed. We have found it referred to back to the documents that go back to 1800 or a little bit before, as being roughly between I-24 and Nolensville Pike and the county line and Bell Road. Now, what you have to remember is that Bell Road didn't exist then, neither did I-24. So a more specific boundary would have been the railroad tracks back then. And then it sort of cut a swath down the Bell's lands and along what was called Horton Road at that time, which later became Old Hickory Boulevard. So it's approximate boundaries as we define them today. Cane Ridge was its own sort of standalone community, and then eventually was absorbed by Antioch and its zip code back in the day. So Cane Ridge just sort of defines the more southern, more rural aspect of a portion of Antioch. And as many of you know, Antioch is absolutely huge. It is just an enormous chunk of our Southeast Davidson County. So Cane Ridge just sort of defines that it's that area that exists between I-24, Nolensville Pike, county line, and Bell Road, Old Hickory Boulevard.
And it has been a traditionally more rural area, part of town.
That's right. Many of the original land grant families who settled into that area still live in the area today, and they were traditionally farmers, lots of dairies. There were many, many dairies back in the day. There were many slave residences back in the day, and much of what exists in this area was done from the back of slavery. And so you can actually travel back in time and find the common names, and you can go back and see ownership records on the old censuses, and having those records and having the benefit of families staying in the same area and providing oral history, and the benefit of some of the old maps that were drawn that were so precise for back in the day is what has allowed us to identify a lot of what you'll find referenced in the Community Resource Declaration. And so I want to give you a little background as to why this document began. Back in the 70s, large chunks of land were bought by developers, and some in the 80s. And many of those were just bought as investment and held on to. And oftentimes back then it was done without much community input. The community didn't even realize they could have input. We knew there were council people, council representatives, but there was just not much thought about that. And so the the developers bought things and just held on to them. Suddenly I'm seeing no one but myself, and that's not comfortable. The developers bought these tracts of land and held on to them. Thank you, Jim. I'd much rather be looking at you than me. And
Sorry.
the development then began happening in earnest when the economy got better, sometimes in the late 80s, and then there was a pause in growth, and then again, in the late 90s as growth cycles emerged. And so what we started realizing was that these developments were approved without any community feedback. And so the community would get together, and I started realizing we were hearing the same concerns over and over and over. And it didn't matter if it was a really small development over on the edge of Nolensville Pike, or a larger one along Cane Ridge Road, or a moderate one along Old Hickory Boulevard. It didn't matter which sets of neighbors came together. We all as a community voiced the same concerns over and over. And so every time a new developer came along, we had to start all over with mentioning the things that were important to our community and educating every new developer in a way that we thought served our community. And so for me, it was kind of a light bulb moment that we need to develop a document in writing that we can hand to the developers early on and explain to them what things are important to us and what we want them to know about us before they approach us for that first meeting. Here are the things we want you to understand about our community and what makes it special to us. And so from there, it began with identifying these various items and break them down into some reasonable bulleted items, and put it in a way that isn't threatening to a developer. The goal was never to say you cannot develop. The goal was never to plant our feet in the ground and say no, 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 because the people who want development, they are our neighbors. They are oftentimes the persons who we've known for decades, who are the landowners and have reached that point in life that they need to sell their property. So we weren't trying to stop it, but we were trying to make it reasonable. There were things that we saw get destroyed that we were just not okay with. We've had several slave cemeteries that absolutely just got destroyed. We had others that were moved and done so in a way that was not appropriate. We've had other features that were just really, really important to our area. And so we decided to come up with this document, and I started writing it, and we circulated this thing for 18 months, getting feedback from every nook and cranny of Cane Ridge. We circulated it to existing HOAs, to the non-HOA rural residents, new residents, old residents. We made sure we hit every facet that we could hit through all three council districts. We're represented by 31, 32, and 33. So we tried to make sure and hit everyone. We ran it by every council person, and it circulated for a full 18 months before we then started the process of getting community affirmation that this was in fact what they wanted to happen. So, the first paragraph is just kind of the standard thing of identifying who we are, the Cane Ridge community, and that we as neighbors recognize that we have important resources and we want to protect those for the benefit and health and enjoyment of everyone, current and future residents. And to us, naming future residents who didn't live there yet was really important, because one of the mistakes that we all believe we have made through the years is not doing a good enough job of protecting our communities for those residents who haven't come along yet. So that's why it makes a point of talking about both current and future residents. And then we identified the things that we believe are important. And for us, the natural environment is a very large part of that. These things have existed in all of Davidson County. They still exist in Joelton. They still exist in many areas like along Buena Vista and out in Whites Creek and other areas that haven't yet been overdeveloped. All of these things still exist, and that includes streams, wetlands, springs, caves. There are caves everywhere all over Cane Ridge. And then you'll notice that we mentioned both standing and growing trees and standing but not growing trees. And the reason we mention things like that is we realized that where developers had been given leeway to only take down what they perceived to be dead things, for instance, the red-bellied woodpecker that is on the endangered list, they require having standing dead trees in order to get their food source and to have their babies. So there are specific reasons behind, and it's the red-headed woodpecker, my apologies. There are specific reasons that some of the language exists. Darkness is something that you often won't find in the inner city anymore, but you still go into the outskirts of the county and you will find darkness, and in that darkness you will find things that no longer exist in the overly lit areas. So darkness is an important trait for us. The wildlife, we have more wildlife than you can shake a stick at. Old growth forest and cedar glades. We have trees in our area. One that exists right off of Old Acre Boulevard is 17.5 feet around. There's another one right off of I-24 that's nearly 21 feet around. These are humongous trees, and we call them witness trees. They are most often going to be oak trees, and they have seen the development of the growth, since the 1700s. And so those are things that are irreplaceable, and they provide things to a community that you won't find anywhere else. The limestone flats, as is occurring in Melissa's neighborhood, those existed, and it's now a past tense for Cane Ridge. We had some where that we probably would have found the coneflower and other things that are very unique to limestone flats, but those areas are gone now. So we mentioned things like that in the hopes that anything that might be left could be protected. The ponds, you start talking about salamanders and the frogs and different things. They have to have these areas of land. And even just undisturbed swaths of land, that becomes your wildlife passages. So if you want to enjoy rabbits and raccoons and deer and all these other things, they have to have pathways to travel back and forth from one area to another. Soils that haven't been damaged, we forget about. When HOAs come in, oftentimes you start having lawn services come in, and desirable lawns seem to be those that don't have any dandelions or other things that are actually indigenous to the state. And so those kind of things don't support honeybee populations and whatnot. So having soil that hasn't been damaged by chemicals and invasive plant species brings a healthier environment to a neighborhood. And that was something we decided was very important. So that was our natural environment. And it may be a little different for each neighborhood. Each neighborhood might have something that they need to more specifically describe as the natural environment. Many of these things are going to be the same, though. Historical features, we have found we're now over 30 cemeteries that are not listed on the Davidson County cemetery survey. We were able to find them through a map from 1871 that was done by Foster. And you can look at the Davidson County map from 1871 by Foster, and you'll find this. And that map was so accurate that we were able to walk through the woods and locate the old home sites. And with many, many, many of them, we found the old cemeteries, and often would find the slave cemeteries with them. Some of the ones we found, they thought had been lost. For instance, there's one called a Pasquite cemetery, and they actually thought that one had been lost to I-24, but it is still back there with a very large white section and a very large slave section. So things like that are very important to us. We don't want any more of those destroyed. We still have a standing sharecropper cabin, and we know the families who lived in that. We have a standing slave dwelling, and we know a family that lived in that. So those things are important to us. There are road beds all over Cane Ridge, some of which were just farm lanes, but you'll find them lined by stacked rock. And those are things that we felt like developers could incorporate that into developments and leave those things as part of the community. Hand dug wells all over the place, and they often are still containing water. In fact, all of them still contain water that I know about, and they are just as straight as a stick down in there. The walls are just, it's unbelievable the workmanship that existed back then. Hand-tooled stones are all over the place. Many of those we believe are done by slaves, but there's not really a way to prove that at this point. We still have old barns that are over 100 years old standing. We still find Native American artifacts, and just many locations that are worthy of markers and preservation, because once it's gone forever. We'll never get to show our children again. We won't get to talk about how connected communities can be, nor will we be able to get new or future residents to feel connected because they know something about the land on which they live now. Historical peoples, many of the names that you find listed there were white families who also owned Black families. And so those names stretch far and wide and just say so much about our people. And many of those families still live within our community. The Jordans and the Maxwells, for instance, they farmed Bell Road. There was no Bell Road then, but they farmed that area for decades and decades and decades. And you may know that the Maxwells had the first fruit stand out here. And, you know, it's just very important families to our communities, and families that we should not lose sight of. Healthy environment, much of that is tied in with the natural environment stuff, but we wanted to make sure that we named all the things that are kind of expectations for any developments that come in. So now when developments come in, we talk about leaving the trees up so that our air is cleaner. We talk about leaving the trees up so that they absorb some of the noise pollution that comes in from I-24. We talk about building in walking trails now to connect the communities and for people to have the opportunity within the new developments to get out and walk around and enjoy the environment around them. And we still have the opportunity to incorporate the trails that connect all these communities, and that's part of being a better neighbor. The neighborhood connectivity, again, boy, if you don't plan it in now, you don't get a second chance later. You've got to preserve those aisles now for both humans and for wildlife. And just to have quiet spaces. How awesome is it to get on a hillside somewhere and be able to see towards downtown Nashville and just enjoy it from your neighborhood? The bird watching, wild berry picking opportunities, believe it or not, there are still people who enjoy picking blackberries and raspberries and making jams and jellies out of them. We still have the farms, we still have people who do lots of gardening, and we want others to get that opportunity. Mill Creek is still canoeable, and we have had lots of places put in now where the people get to put in a canoe or a kayak and enjoy that with their family and get to take them fishing. And we're still working on having more of the parks and places to meet neighbors. Rural character are just those things that are kind of hard to describe, but it's what has drawn people to our area for these hundreds of years. And if you don't actually identify that rolling hills and streams and trees and farmable soils are something that attracts people to an area, if you don't name it, you don't work to keep it. And so all of these things were the 5 sort of pillars that we identified as things that we wanted to keep. It's not actually moving up, Jim.
Nope.
And so you might have to actually click on the second page, perhaps. If there are any attorneys in the room, I think what you will notify next is that we have named these things as things that we want to exist in order to begin collaboration and just even consider lending our support to those endeavors. And so what you'll start noticing are lots of shoulds and reasonables and those sorts of words. There's nothing in this document that says developers must do A, B, C. It's a lot about here are things that we would like to be done, where reasonable, here are things we want done. Because again, we weren't trying to create a document that prohibited developers from even having a conversation or being able to do anything. So it talks about developers should reach out to us early in the planning phases. We have had developers come out and not talk to us until they had spent $30,000, $40,000 on plans, only to find out that that plan went right over top of a cemetery or something else that was very important, that was going to be a game changer. And so enough time has passed now for us having this, that they are reaching out now before they ever talk to anybody. They're often reaching out and saying, hey, what do we need to know about this land and how it connects to the others around us? We want them to talk to other developers. And this has been important for a couple of adjacent developments. They've been able to incorporate walking trails that went from one development into the adjacent one in a way that has worked really well. And you end up with something that looks really nicely planned instead of something that looks haphazardly put together. There's just an enormous difference in something that looks planned and something that isn't. And so we talk about the systemic approach. We kind of have this grand vision of having a system of trails and walkways and wildlife passages that connects all of Cane Ridge. And that's what we're working towards doing. And so we envision this system of connected spaces, which do not adversely impact developments, but which instead are reasonable and improve the development while also benefiting the community. Feedback that we have heard so far from developers who are working with us on these kind of things is it's actually allowing them to have developments that are better, that are higher priced, that cost them less, and work better for the community. It's a win-win-win situation all the way around. Also works better with Metro Planning and Metro Council, because they're not getting angry groups of citizens coming up at the Planning Commission meeting and raising Cane because there haven't been good conversations. In item C, we're sort of giving them some idea of some of the scholarly groups with whom we have worked that have led to having good conversations and good protections, and letting them know that these are groups that we also want them to reach out to, or groups like them, as is necessary for an individual piece of property. And then item D is kind of just, hey, we want you to realize what you're moving into. We want you to realize that these deed restrictions and HOA developments are worth protecting just like everything else. Everyone has the interest, even those who were in some of our first HOAs, like Cane Ridge Farms years ago. Now they realize the benefit in protecting everything around them. So even those groups are all on board. They'll list the same things that the non-HOA residents list as being beneficial. It's what everybody, it's the common ground for everybody. So item E is one of the things that we are like really sticking to, that we want them to have walking trails and paths which connect everything. We also are asking them to put up markers that maybe one marker might be about a tree species. The next one might be about a family who lived on the area. So just educational markers that allow people to feel connected to the land on which they are now living and walking. Item F, this document was actually created before our latest tree legislation occurred, and we were already talking about things that we wanted protected along those lines. And this one kind of requires a bit of give and take, where you know that you have a pocket of really nice mature hardwoods, and some of them are, they're 10 feet and bigger around. If you're asking a developer to leave that, then you might need to look at a little more density somewhere else on the property. And so it really requires some give and take between the developers and the community in order to kind of step back and look at the whole picture and get things done in a way that works well for everyone. We also don't want invasive species. One of the things that's happened to our area are those Bradford pear trees that didn't used to grow, but now because of the warmer temperatures, they have sprouted like crazy, and we have whole areas that have been taken over by those things. So we're working hard to make sure that no invasives are planted in the incoming developments that are done. The century trees I talked about already, but we've got quite a few of those. That the century trees often would exist where an old home site would have been. They often are over cemeteries and other things that we want protected, and they're generally in places that are really nice little pocket parks, or even bigger than pocket parks, for the citizens to continue enjoying. And you just can't take down one of those and have one grow back where everything's been disturbed around it. So if you have a century tree that is 100 foot tall, and you disturb the soil around it within 30 or 40 feet of that tree, it's not gonna live. And so if you put it in writing that that tree is being protected, that also means you're protecting a pretty nice area around the bottom of it. And if it's on top of a hillside, then you're also protecting the rest of the hillside. So it works out pretty well. So H is talking about making sure that these things go with the land in a way that the preservation, if they sell that development, and we've come to these agreements, it has to continue with it. The community traits in item I about lighting or lack of lighting is, again, something that was important to us. Whether it be subdivision markers or the address markers or those sorts of things, we're working to make sure that it has some decorative lighting that, again, adds to the community and doesn't detract from it. We don't want to be a neighborhood of bright street lights. It's just, you can't have both things existing in the same place. So we want the lower lighting where you're just lighting up the necessary walkways and pathways and not overdoing it with the light. Item J is just an opportunity that we want to be available to future residents. Community gardens and stuff, there are people that would love to do those and they don't get the chance to because there simply hasn't been an area left aside for them to do that. And so we want that. There are other times where instead of that, they're doing dog parks and pickleball courts and different things. So again, nothing about this document is set in stone. It can be changed up for each development as is needed. K, they're doing the historical markers we've already talked about. L is making sure that when HOA agreements are written and when new developments come in, that they make sure that they, one of the ways we found to work on this is that they have a seat on their HOA board, just one seat for a member from the community, so that we can sort of educate them about what's gone on before and what other projects are going on. And just, it's all about communication and letting them know that, you're welcome into the community. We're so glad to have you. Here's some things you might want to know about the community. We'd love to have you at meetings, so on and so forth. So just encouraging them to really take up their community and become part of it. In the public meetings, nothing can substitute for good public meetings where you have some good back and forth discussions. one thing that has worked well for us is we'll have these smaller focus group meetings where we kind of cover these things that arise in every single development. These questions are going to be asked. So instead of wasting the community members' time for these and some of the building standards that always come up, we'll have these smaller groups, anywhere from 5 to about 9 people meeting with just a couple from the development group. And we'll sort of get all this stuff hashed out so that we don't waste people's time with that. And then when we actually do a big community meeting, we're really getting down to the nuts and bolts and answering some questions. And people leave much more satisfied because they don't have to keep repeating the same things over and over again. So then we talk about, again, we consider this to be a first basic step. It doesn't mean there's going to be full support for anything. It doesn't mean there won't be issues to work through. There have to be many other meetings. And then we list some of the things that always, again, come up: funding for traffic infrastructure, traditional neighborhood designs, support for slowing and minimizing traffic. We now call this traffic calming by design. And actually now Public Works has taken up our phrase of that. And that's things like, instead of having roads that come straight through like this, if you make it an offset intersection, then people have to pause. They can't go whizzing through it 60 miles an hour. And just a real quick reason to explain the logic behind that. If you build a very straight, wide road through a development, you are creating a situation where that the residents are going to turn around and need to ask for a police officer to run radar there because you built a road that allows for zooming. If instead you smartly design that roadway, then the residents don't end up having that to deal with, and you solve that problem forevermore. And so we're also pointing out here that there will be concern about style and density of the homes, designs that create a sense of community harmony, the schools issues, local businesses where possible, community services organizations. It doesn't take away all these other things that need to be dealt with. Our second set of documents that we are working on, and that is mostly finished, we just kind of need to spruce it up a bit, are the community building standards for Cane Ridge, where we get into more nuts and bolts about, okay, now you've done the community resource declaration items. Here are some of the additional things that we want you to look at if you still want to move forwards. And that again goes back to not having to repeat the same things every time. We want the stone work at the intersections to be a little further back. We want it to have a little bit better lighting. We want to make sure that the houses are built with better door hardware so the doors can't be kicked open. We want the bottom floor windows to be triple pane so those can't be broken open as easily. You know, you start getting into the things that are asked about in every single development. So we're getting that in writing so that we can go, here's a document you can look at. If you were intent on using vinyl siding, you're not going to be a good fit for us because these are the baseline things that we want you to do. So that's kind of the thought process that went behind this. It has worked really well. We've had some great relationships with several developers in our area. This document has saved us a lot of time and keeps us from having to rehash the same items. Developers have expressed that they're very grateful for it, and it it saves everybody time, which means it saves everybody money, because nobody wants to have 10 meetings going through the same things for every single development. So that's what I got on it.
Thanks, Twana.
Did I talk too long?
No, you're perfect. I could time you by my watch. Let's take questions and comments. Twana's up and ready to go. So what do you got for her?
It's just damn good to see Twana. That's all I got to say.
Yeah.
You know, given
Thank you.
given the world as it is,
Let's keep a bit like
it's just friggin' amazing.
Yeah, I actually called Twana a couple, I guess it was 2 weeks ago. I was calling to say, we can postpone this. And the first thing she said was, are we doing this on? And I'm like, oh, okay. So that's how it's going to be. Hey, George has a question or a comment.
Hey, I was just making sure that I was unmuted, and I'm gonna echo John. Twana, it is awesome to see you. And I had a couple questions. Whites Creek is working on a community resource declaration, and I wondered if it was possible for us to get a copy of what you worked on with Cane Ridge's Community Club. And if we could get a copy, is it okay to use that as an instrument for using it kind of as a content layout for drafting our own?
Sure, sure, sure. And it looks like Jim's already put a link up. And if you've ever gotten an email from me, it's in that email link as well.
Awesome, thank you. I think I was able to find an older copy online that was marked as draft, so I'll look for the new link. And then
yeah, I'm sorry. If it still says that, John Stern will be able to help out with getting one that doesn't say that. I'm sorry for that. If you got that.
No, no problem. Yes, sir.
George, I'll upload, I'll put a link to the last final document in Windows form in the chat here in just a second, okay?
Awesome, thank you all. And then just a little bit of news from us in Whites Creek. If y'all are familiar with the Hudson versus Metro case that argued successfully at the Tennessee State Court of Appeals that the Planning Commission had the authority to make decisions based on policy, which in our case in Nashville is Nashville Next. At our most recent Planning Commission appearance, Metro Legal Associate Director Laura Fox did confirm that to the commissioners, that they have the authority to make decisions based on policy. So that's, I think that's great. And then two things, full credit to Councilwoman in District 3, Jennifer Gamble. She's been great to work with. Whites Creek is working on a bulk downzoning of some neighbors in response to what we see as very inappropriately patterned proposals coming into Whites Creek towards the Rural Historic District. So we're in the neighborhood of somewhere a bandwagon of about 500 acres going to RS 80 from small density suburban zoning. And then also last bit, also super credit to Councilwoman Gamble. We're in conversations with her of working to strip the cluster lot option from RS 80 as an option for maintaining a rural pattern in an area without the cluster lot option. Obviously, we are hopeful that the cluster lot option review will produce new meaningful results, but that last we heard was that was still a couple months away. And I'll take a breath and thank you all again. And Twana, it was really great to see you, and thank you for all this huge work.
Hey, Twana, can I react to George real quick? George,
Sure.
we've also got another problem is that we've got a council lady, Joy Stiles, who's out here in District 32, who is attempting to be the council planning and zoning committee chairperson. That we don't believe that would be a good idea. I thought of Council Lady Gamble as a possible alternative to Joy Stiles, but we need to take sort of preemptive action on that if we want to keep kind of the neighborhood thing going. And congratulations on your work. It's awesome.
Oh, thank y'all as well. Yeah, let's have a conversation about that. Be happy to talk about it maybe at another meeting or just on our own.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, yes, and I see a note from Councilmember Allen. Yes, Councilmember.
Excuse me, George, I would also encourage you to get with residents in that historic Whites Creek area and look at that same map I was referencing. You will just be amazed at how many old home sites you can find based on that map. And you need to know about things like Vinca and the old sandstone walls and the limestone walls. And if you lay over the old streams and railroad tracks over some of the oldest road beds, you'll be amazed at what you can still find, and that will help y'all identify some of your resources.
Yeah, thank you. We have worked with the state archaeology department for locating some enslaved African American graveyards. We found millstones out of different lots that we didn't think that had mills on it. So yes, ma'am, it's a good resource to look at. I think maybe I joined the call after that map was discussed, but I'm wondering if maybe you're referring to Metro's 1861 map that's online, or if you could tell me which map you're talking about.
No, this is the Foster. He's the, Foster Creighton Avenue. He was a CSX engineer. Foster 1871 Davidson County map. And there's a very large, it's a 871 megabyte TIFF file that you can download and zoom into. And it shows you whose residences are where. So if you know of a very old home in your area, that's also another thing you can use to sort of twist the map a little bit and make sure everything lays out. But it is extremely accurate. You'll be able to find lots of stuff with it.
And check, make sure you can download the Word file that I just posted on the chat.
Hey, Twana, you mentioned that this took 18 months to come to. I think we erroneously put in that it was the Cane Ridge Community Club group that approved this, but this was actually a much larger group, was it not?
That's right.
And estimating, how many people do you think were engaged in this process?
We probably had feedback from maybe 300. That's a hard thing to know. We were regular meeting membership back then was anywhere from 40 to 70. Our biggest community meetings back then were some of the really controversial projects. So often those were right at 100. I mean, we had several meetings that were capacity. We talked about it at all of those. We talked about it at HOA meetings that occurred because a lot of them used the Cane Ridge Community Building for that. We talked about it on Facebook, on Nextdoor. We got feedback from people that I'd never seen at a community meeting and really haven't seen since. They don't come to meetings, but they keep up with what's going on and they respond to this kind of thing. So it's a hard number to judge, but 300 to 400 ought to be about accurate.
And it's spread out since, Jim. The District 33, the entire district has gotten on board the idea and the processes involved in it. So what started with Twana and Cane Ridge Community Club is spreading, not like a fungus, but more like sugar cane.
And this is so important because so often we are focused on our urban core and those urban neighborhoods. And it's to the detriment of our rural communities, our rural neighborhoods. And you all, actually, you got Whites Creek and Cane Ridge here are doing amazing things. You're just amazing people out there doing wonderful things to help this city be its very best. And thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you for saying so, Jim.
From an urbanite who appreciates how important it is to be able to drive out or live in the more rural areas. So thank you.
Well, we like to say that Music City was built on country music. It's tough to have country music without country. So it's a cycle that feeds itself.
It is that. Whatever. Yeah, Melissa.
And I think everybody should get to know Twana and John Stern because they're the best. I mean, they helped out here by Lakeside Cove as well. I mean, John is on District 33, but Twana isn't, and she was kind enough to come and look at the lot over there that wanted to put like over 200 homes across the street from us. And she went and walked with me. And I mean, she's just amazing. And we kind of put a stop on that and they haven't even come back yet. but you know, she taught me a lot, and there's so much to learn still, but they are awesome. I mean, thank you guys.
You're welcome. Any, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, Councilwoman Allen, what are your comments or feedback?
Well, I just tuned in, and I apologize for not getting in earlier, but I'm just so impressed that y'all have proactively come up with a list of things that developers can get on the front end. And I did email Councilmember John Rutherford this morning, and he just commented on how effective it is to be able to have a set of criteria, and if the project remotely connects with any of those, and he says, let's talk about it. Here's the neighborhood group, and here's the criteria that you have to go with. So there are no surprises, and they've got predictability, and that's what they all say they need. And so instead of finishing their project and coming to a neighborhood with it totally baked and inflexible, it just makes a whole lot more sense to have this process in place. So I look forward to trying to put it to use.
And it's such a much more pleasant process. I mean, it is stressful for community members to try to show up at planning or council meetings. And it is stressful for developers, especially young ones, to try to go make a case before planning or the community. And so where we can already have this worked out together, we have had several meetings where the Planning Commission only gives you the opportunity to speak in opposition to or support of a project. And so, I have to stand up and say opposition because I don't have that third choice, but I always say, I'm not here in opposition or support. I just want to tell you about how this interaction went. And we've had some great things to say. We had one of the developers who finished our statement for us because they get 10 minutes and we only got 2, and the process had gone so well that he finished reading the statement for us. So it's just, it's just great. So it really works well for all of us. We end up with better communities when we do it this way. I have a group of doctors standing outside the room, so I might have to go here in just a minute.
Well, and Twana pointed out an amazing point of inflection when the attorney for a developer stood up and finished her statement for her. I've never seen it done in the last 33 years that I've been watching. It was incredible. And Twana is incredible. And we love her out here. And whatever we can do for you, girl, we're here.
I appreciate it. Ed Branding's hand has been up for a while.
Yes, I don't know if you've answered this or not. I froze when we came out of your slide presentation, and so I've been rebooting for the last, I don't know, half hour. But I had 2 questions, one of which you've answered, and that is you talked about the 3 council districts. Madison has essentially 5. Antioch has 3, but they're really big. Has there been any discussion of expanding the council representation down here with the growth, and perhaps scraping some residents off of adjoining council districts to effectively create a 4th council district to give Antioch, the Antioch block, a little larger voice? Or is 3 the number that you see coming out of redistricting?
That's a question that's actually better suited for Councilwoman Allen if she's willing to answer that.
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, the planning department is in the process of meeting with every single council member and telling them the census data that we've seen so far tells me that your district is either above the average or below the average. And so we're either going to have to add area to your district or give some of your area to the district next door. So I don't know what those numbers look like, except that I do know the Antioch area has been growing faster than anything. So my guess is that that you'll see some shifting of the lines and probably an additional council representative just to take that into account. That theoretically, the official numbers are coming in September and that process will begin. So you can go to the planning website now and see what they've done so far. And also you can fill out a survey on that planning website about where you feel like the boundaries of logical boundaries of neighborhoods are. And that's important input for them to have as they start the process.
Thank you.
I'm gonna thank Twana, because if she has those doctors out in front of her, oh, they're gone now?
Yeah, it's just shift change. It was just the nurses. We're still waiting on the doctor.
Any other comments or questions for Twana?
Do you still need me to take you to your appointment on Thursday?
Oh, we should talk about that.
Okay.
I
well,
don't
let me
know, because I don't know where I will be, so we'll have to see.
That's what it sounded like. So let me know, okay?
Well, then we're going to wrap up. First of all, thanks, Twana, for being here today. It is so good to see you. Upright, jovial, coherent, all those good things. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Let me just, if I could just close by saying mental health is a thing. I think everybody's probably heard, but my brother had mental health issues, and on July 14th, he shot me about 10 times before he took his own life. If you know people that have issues, we can't make people do things they don't want to do, but please encourage them and educate yourself and listen to those tiny voices and reach out for help. I'm happy to talk to anybody, anytime, anywhere. But we can't win them all, but if we talk about things often enough and especially early enough, maybe somewhere somebody else doesn't have to go through this kind of thing. So I'm very, very, very fortunate to be here with you. I'm very happy to be here with you. And it's something I'll be talking more about because it's just a heck of an experience. So it's a terrible one to have. And it's just something we need to, I have no intention of being secretive about it. So anything anybody wants to ask me anytime, you're more than welcome to do so. And thank you, Jim, for putting this together.
Absolutely. So let me look toward the future here real quick. I know a lot of organizations, even before the pandemic, were struggling getting people out to their meetings and really wondering what was going to happen. And then the pandemic came, and most groups sort of went dormant, although some found Zoom, and many of those groups that found Zoom actually saw an increase in participation. But we are moving toward the point, hopefully, where this pandemic is going to be in the rearview mirror. We had actually planned the recovery workshop thinking that we were well on our way out of everything. But now is the time to begin thinking about post-COVID and how we're going to move out of that. Not just to get back to normal, because let's face it, for most of our neighborhood organizations, participation in those groups is low. We could have so many more people. So how do we move out of the COVID era and into a time when we're thriving as a neighborhood organization? And this is going to be a true workshop, which means I'm not coming with any answers. I mean, I have a couple things in my back pocket, but my assumption is we all do. Some things that could help dramatically change the way we are living and existing as neighborhood organizations. So I want to encourage you to join me. That's Saturday, August 28th. It's going to be, we said 3 hours, so probably be about 2.5 hours of just talking with one another and learning from one another about what we can be doing to make a difference in our communities. And then next week, we're going to have Kathy Floyd Buggs coming in. She's going to do an intro to the Mayor's Office of Neighborhoods and Community Engagement. I've heard her say that they've sort of had to be, can't be out as they want to be in neighborhoods across the metropolitan area during COVID. So she wants to talk about what they're going to be doing and what they're working on in that office. So we'll learn more about that next week. invite you back for both of those. Anybody else have any important announcements that we should be making at this point? All right,
You had a question in chat about how to access the recording of the meeting.
oh, great, good question. So we will take these and download them and give them to a volunteer video editor, and it will be on our YouTube channel and website in anywhere from 10 to 14 days, sometimes sooner, sometimes a little slower, but basically 10 to 14 days, and it will be available for you. George.
I wanted to raise my hand real quick and talk about the participatory budgeting pilot that's going on. So as you all go back to your community meetings and resume what Jim was talking about, looking to up re-engagement, you'll probably begin to see solicitations from the budget delegates and steering committee members from this participatory budget pilot in the Whites Creek, North Nashville, Bordeaux area. If you know of neighbors in there, we'll be looking for ideas from them, just sharing that. So thank you.
All right, everybody. So as you leave, I used to be a Methodist minister, so just let me give you the benediction. Great neighborhoods don't happen by accident. Find your neighborhood passion and work hard to make your neighborhood safe and vibrant place to live. And know this, that there are other people just like you working just as hard across not just this metropolitan area, but in every place around the world. You're not alone. Keep up the good fight. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.